A scream tore across the HOA Garden Festival just as Brenda Whitmore bit into a pepper she had stolen from my backyard that morning. Her basket hit the ground. Red peppers scattered across the grass. People rushed toward her. Others grabbed the samples she had proudly laid out on her table. 3 seconds later, more coughing erupted across the lawn. The sweet smell of peaches mixed with panic and spilled lemonade. This wasn't just my fruit anymore. Half the neighborhood was involved now. What Brenda didn't know was that every plant in that basket came from a section of my orchard monitored by a camera system I built myself. Then the second person reached for a water bottle. Then a third. The festival that Brenda had organized was unraveling in front of hundreds of people. I stood near the fence line and watched the chaos spread beneath strings of white festival lights. Children stopped running. Music cut off mid-song. Somebody knocked over a folding table. The sharp smell of cut grass hung in the warm afternoon air. Brenda staggered toward a drink station, fanning her mouth and yelling at anyone who came near her. For months, she had treated my orchard like her personal grocery store. Now the entire neighborhood was watching the consequences play out in real time. A few hours earlier, I had watched her walk through my side gate on a security monitor mounted above my workshop bench. The screen glowed blue in the dim morning light. Dew still clung to the leaves. She carried the same wicker basket she always used. Calm, confident, like she belonged there. That basket wasn't new. Neither was the theft. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 44 years old, and I grow fruit on a 2-acre property tucked against the edge of Willow Creek Estates. Most mornings start with coffee, irrigation checks, and the sound of sprinklers ticking through the orchard rows. That routine had been steady for years. Lately, it hadn't stayed steady for long. The first missing peaches were easy to dismiss. The second harvest wasn't. Then entire rows started disappearing. Someone wasn't taking a piece of fruit. Someone was harvesting. Every week, the losses grew larger. Baskets disappeared. Branches were stripped clean. Fresh footprints appeared between irrigation lines before sunrise. The theft wasn't random. It was organized. Then Brenda started showing up at HOA events with fruit that looked strangely familiar. That was when people began asking questions. Brenda was one of those HOA personalities everyone recognized before they heard her speak. White Lexus, designer sunglasses, clipboard, perfect smile. She ran committees, festivals, neighborhood meetings, and somehow inserted herself into everything else. Most people tolerated her because arguing with Brenda usually created more paperwork than peace. Recently, she had become obsessed with my orchard. She complained about branches hanging too close to the fence. She complained about delivery trucks. She complained about visitors buying fruit on weekends. The complaints kept coming. Then I noticed something else. Every new complaint seemed to arrive right after another section of fruit vanished. The pattern was getting harder to ignore. By the time the festival began that afternoon, I already had weeks of footage stored on hard drives inside my workshop. Footage of gates opening. Footage of baskets filling. Footage of people entering places they had no business entering. And Brenda appeared far more often than she should have. The peppers were only one piece of a much larger picture. Then I saw who walked up beside her table. The man who stepped up beside Brenda's table was Tom Harrison, a retired accountant who had lived in Willow Creek Estates longer than almost anyone else. Tom was not the type to rush into drama. He moved slowly. He spoke carefully, and he noticed details most people missed. I watched him pick up one of the peppers from Brenda's display and turn it over in his hand. The afternoon sun reflected off the smooth red skin. He frowned. Then he looked across the lawn toward me. That caught my attention. Tom knew my orchard. He bought fruit from me every summer. He knew exactly what I grew and what I did not. Before he could say anything, another wave of commotion rolled through the festival. People crowded around the drink station. Folding chairs scraped across concrete. The smell of spilled lemonade drifted through the warm air. Brenda was still drawing attention to herself. That gave Tom little chance to ask questions. Not yet. I slipped away before anyone could pull me into the chaos. My workshop sat behind the orchard near the back fence. The familiar hum of cooling fans greeted me as I stepped inside. Security monitors lined one wall. Hard drives blinked steadily beneath them. I built the system myself over 3 winters. Every gate, every path, every corner of the orchard, covered. Some people spend money on fancy vacations. I spent mine protecting something my family had built over generations. The orchard was never supposed to become a business. It started with my father. He planted the first peach trees when I was 9 years old. I still remember the smell of fresh soil that spring. I remember carrying buckets of water across the property while he marked rows with bright orange string. Back then, there were no HOA meetings. No complaints. No cameras. Just trees and work. Lots of work. Over the years, the orchard grew. Peaches, apples, pears, cherries, then specialty crops. The place became part of the neighborhood. Families visited every season. Kids picked fruit on weekends. School groups toured the property during harvest months. Some of those kids came back years later with children of their own. That mattered to me. After my wife passed away, the orchard mattered even more. The routines helped. The early mornings helped. The quiet helped. My daughter Lily understood that better than anyone. She was 16 now. Smart. Observant. Much more observant than most adults. A few weeks before the festival, she sat beside me reviewing camera footage after dinner. Rain tapped softly against the windows that night. The glow from the monitors filled the room. We watched another basket disappear from the south orchard. Lily pointed at the screen. She is not even trying to hide it anymore. She was right. At first, whoever was taking fruit moved carefully. Then the confidence grew. Gates stayed open longer. Trips became more frequent. Sometimes there were guests. That was what bothered me most. Someone had started treating my property like public land. The theft itself was frustrating. The entitlement behind it was worse. Then Lily noticed something I had missed. The same people showing up on camera also appeared regularly at HOA events. Some even worked closely with Brenda. That connection kept resurfacing. Different days, different footage, same circle of people. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Then Lily paused one particular recording and leaned closer to the screen. Lily froze the frame and pointed at the lower corner of the screen. A white SUV sat parked across the street. The headlights were off. The vehicle never entered my property. It just waited. We rewound the footage. The same SUV appeared 3 different times that month. Same location. Same timing. 10 minutes before someone entered the orchard. 10 minutes after they left. The room fell quiet except for the soft hum of the hard drives. Lily leaned back in her chair. That is not random. She was right. The next evening, I started reviewing older recordings. Hours turned into days. Days turned into weeks of footage. Patterns emerged. Certain visitors always arrived after HOA meetings. Certain gates were tested before fruit disappeared. Sometimes people wandered through rows they had no reason to visit. Other times they walked directly to the most productive sections. They knew exactly where to go. That knowledge bothered me. My orchard was not visible from the road. Most of those trees sat behind fences and hedges. Someone had been sharing information, and one name kept floating to the surface. Brenda Whitmore. The more footage I reviewed, the more often she appeared. Sometimes she entered personally. Sometimes she stayed near the fence. Sometimes she talked with visitors during community events only days before another harvest vanished. Then another detail surfaced. Several complaints filed against my property carried dates that matched the thefts almost perfectly. Excessive visitor traffic, improper signage, parking concerns, landscaping concerns. The list kept growing. Every complaint required time. Every complaint pulled my attention away from the orchard. Every complaint seemed to benefit someone else. The smell of fresh coffee filled the workshop one Saturday morning as I spread HOA notices across the workbench. Lily helped organize them by date. The timeline looked ugly. Complaints increased. Missing fruit increased. Camera activity increased. Everything climbed together. That should have been enough to confront someone. It was not. I wanted proof. Real proof. Something nobody could dismiss. Around that time, Brenda became even more visible in the neighborhood. She chaired festival committees. She led beautification projects. She hosted planning sessions. Her social media pages filled with photos of fresh produce, homemade preserves, and community harvest celebrations. Some of the fruit looked painfully familiar. One photograph stopped me cold. A basket of peaches sat on her kitchen counter. Large peaches. Deep red blush. Small mark near the stem. I recognized that exact variety because only 12 trees of it existed on my property. The photo stayed on my screen for a long time. Then I zoomed in. My stomach tightened. One peach still carried part of a tag from my orchard inventory system. Brenda had posted the evidence herself. Yet nobody questioned it. Most neighbors saw a smiling volunteer helping the community. They did not see the cameras. They did not see the missing harvests. They did not see the growing pattern hiding underneath the surface. And Brenda seemed increasingly confident that nobody ever would. Then a new notice arrived in my mailbox. The notice arrived on a Thursday afternoon. The paper was still warm from the mailbox when I pulled it out. A sharp smell of sun-baked cardboard drifted from the stack of envelopes. This one carried the familiar HOA logo across the top. I already knew who was behind it. I opened it while standing beside the orchard gate. According to the letter, my property was under review for unauthorized agricultural activity. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. The orchard had been there longer than most of the houses in Willow Creek Estates. The accusation made no sense. That was the point. Someone wanted my attention somewhere else. The breeze pushed through the peach trees. Leaves rustled overhead. I folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. Then I walked straight to the workshop. Lily looked up from her homework when I entered. I handed her the notice. She scanned the page. Her eyebrows rose immediately. They are getting desperate. That word stayed with me. Desperate. The next week brought 3 more notices. Parking concerns, visitor concerns, signage concerns. None of them held up under scrutiny. Yet every complaint required responses, emails, and documentation. Hours disappeared. The orchard needed attention. Harvest season was approaching. Instead, I found myself sitting at a desk answering paperwork. Then another shipment vanished. This time it was pears. Nearly 60 pounds. Gone overnight. The loss hit harder than usual. Those pears were already sold. Families were expecting them. I walked the rows early the next morning. Dew soaked my boots. The air smelled clean and cool. Empty branches stretched across several trees. Fresh footprints crossed the irrigation path. Somebody had been there only hours earlier. Then I noticed something hanging from a fence post. A bright pink ribbon. It fluttered gently in the breeze. The same color Brenda used for nearly every community event. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it meant everything. I bagged it anyway. Later that afternoon, I visited Tom Harrison. He sat on his porch drinking iced tea. Cicadas buzzed from the trees around his yard. When I mentioned the missing harvests, he listened carefully. When I mentioned Brenda, he became quieter. That got my attention. Tom stared across the street for several seconds before speaking. Then he told me something I had never heard before. Over the last year, several neighbors had complained privately about missing produce from backyard gardens. Tomatoes, apples, herbs, small things. Nobody reported it publicly. Nobody wanted conflict. Most assumed it was wildlife. Others simply gave up. But the stories kept sounding familiar. The same timing, the same neighborhoods, the same HOA circles appearing nearby. Suddenly, my orchard did not look like an isolated target anymore. The scale felt larger. The pattern felt older. On the drive home, the pieces kept turning over in my mind. The smell of fertilizer drifted through the truck window as I passed a nearby farm. Small thefts, repeated complaints, familiar names, familiar faces. Somebody had grown comfortable. Too comfortable. That evening, I opened the camera archive again. Hours of footage rolled across the screens. Gates opened. Visitors entered. Baskets filled. Then a face appeared that I had never noticed before. The man stepped out of the white SUV and walked directly toward Brenda. The man from the white SUV appeared again in footage recorded 6 days earlier. This time the image was clearer. He stepped out carrying a clipboard. Not an HOA clipboard. Something else. He walked across the parking lot outside the community center and met Brenda near the entrance. The camera angle did not capture their conversation. It captured something better. An exchange. Brenda handed him a folder. He placed it inside a messenger bag. Then both of them looked around before heading in opposite directions. I replayed the clip 3 times. The workshop felt unusually quiet. Even the cooling fan seemed softer. Lily leaned closer to the monitor. Who is he? I did not know. Yet. The next morning I printed several still images from the footage. Then I drove into town. A light rain had passed through overnight. The roads were damp. The smell of wet pavement drifted through the open truck window. My first stop was a local coffee shop near the county offices. People talk in places like that. Especially retired people. Especially on weekday mornings. I showed the photos to a few familiar faces. Most shrugged. One man paused. He stared at the image longer than the others. Then he tapped the picture with his finger. That looks like Randall Pierce. The name meant nothing to me. The man explained. Randall worked as an independent consultant. Property management. Community planning. Administrative support. A little bit of everything depending on who hired him. That answer only created more questions. By afternoon, I found Randall's business page online. Several HOA communities appeared among his listed clients. Willow Creek Estates sat near the top. That caught my attention immediately. Later that week, another notice arrived. This one claimed my orchard signage violated community appearance standards. The timing felt almost predictable now. Every time I uncovered something, another complaint surfaced. Another distraction. Another demand for time and paperwork. I filed the response anyway. Then I kept digging. A few days later, Lily joined me in the workshop after school. We reviewed additional footage from community events. Randall appeared more often than expected. HOA meetings, volunteer projects, seasonal festivals, budget presentations. He was everywhere. Yet most residents probably did not know his name. Then Lily spotted something important. Randall frequently carried the same messenger bag, the same one from the parking lot footage. The bag appeared at meetings, events, gatherings. Almost everywhere Brenda appeared. That connection kept resurfacing. The pattern was becoming harder to dismiss. Then another clue surfaced unexpectedly. Tom Harrison called one evening just before sunset. The sky outside glowed orange above the orchard rows. Crickets chirped beyond the fence line. Tom sounded hesitant, careful, like someone deciding whether to share information. He told me several neighbors had recently questioned unusual HOA expenses. Small amounts, nothing dramatic. Consulting fees, administrative reimbursements, event costs. Most people ignored them. Few looked closely, but the names attached to those payments sounded familiar. One of them was Randall Pierce. The smell of fresh-cut grass drifted through the workshop door as Tom spoke. I wrote everything down. Dates, amounts, names, connections. The list was growing faster now. Fruit thefts, HOA complaints, mysterious expenses, familiar faces appearing across all three. What started as missing harvests no longer looked like a neighborhood nuisance. Something larger sat underneath it. Something organized. Then Randall's name appeared somewhere I never expected. Randall's name appeared in the vendor list for the upcoming HOA Garden Festival. I stared at the document on my monitor while rain tapped softly against the workshop roof. Event Logistics Coordinator. That was his official role. The title sounded harmless. The timing did not. The festival was only a few weeks away. Suddenly, several pieces started fitting together. Brenda controlled the public face of the event. Randall handled the operations behind it. And somehow both men kept appearing near every problem connected to my orchard. The next morning I drove past the community center before sunrise. A pale orange glow sat on the horizon. Sprinklers clicked across nearby lawns. Workers were already unloading tables and tents from a trailer. Randall stood near the entrance talking with two volunteers. I stayed in my truck and watched. He carried the same messenger bag, the same clipboard, the same calm expression. Nothing about him looked suspicious. That was what made him interesting. People rarely question someone who looks organized. Over the following days, I started paying closer attention. Festival announcements appeared everywhere. Flyers, emails, social media posts. Brenda seemed determined to make it the largest event Willow Creek Estates had ever hosted. Every neighborhood page featured smiling photos and cheerful updates. Yet something felt different. More vendors than usual. More sponsors. More money moving around. Then Lily found another connection. She was reviewing public HOA records online one evening when she called me into the kitchen. The smell of tomato soup still lingered from dinner. Her laptop screen displayed a list of approved event purchases. Decorations, equipment rentals, advertising, consulting fees. Several payments stood out, not because they were large, because they repeated. The same consulting company appeared again and again. Different descriptions, different categories, same destination. We searched the business name. The company traced back to Randall Pierce. I leaned back in my chair. Lily slowly shook her head. That seems like a lot of consulting. It did, especially for a neighborhood festival. The next week brought another problem. Several customers contacted me about canceled fruit orders. At first I assumed there had been a mistake. Then I heard the explanation. Someone had told them the orchard might be shutting down due to HOA compliance issues. The rumor spread quickly, faster than it should have, faster than normal gossip. The damage was immediate. Families postponed orders. Small businesses hesitated. Weekend traffic dropped. I spent years building trust with local customers. Rumors were attacking that trust from directions I could not easily track. Then Tom Harrison called again. His voice sounded frustrated this time. He had attended a planning meeting for the festival. During the discussion, Brenda openly suggested that agricultural activity near residential areas created community concerns. She never mentioned my name directly. She did not need to. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. That conversation stayed with me all evening. The smell of fresh mulch drifted through the orchard as I checked irrigation lines before sunset. Water flowed steadily through the system. Trees swayed gently in the breeze. Everything looked peaceful. Yet beneath that calm surface, pressure was building. The complaints were growing. The rumors were spreading. The money trail kept expanding. And Brenda seemed more confident than ever. Then a notification appeared on one of my security monitors. The notification appeared just after 9 p.m. A motion alert flashed across the monitor wall inside my workshop. I set down my coffee and opened the live feed. The orchard sat under a wash of pale security lights. Leaves moved gently in the night breeze. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then a figure stepped through the south gate. My stomach tightened. It was not Brenda. It was Randall. He moved carefully between the rows. Not like a customer. Not like a visitor. Like someone checking inventory. The camera followed him as he stopped beside several trees and made notes on a clipboard. He never picked any fruit. He never touched a branch. He simply observed. Then he pulled out his phone and took photographs. Lots of them. The glow from the screen lit his face for a moment. A few minutes later, another figure entered through the same gate. Brenda. She walked directly toward him without hesitation. No confusion. No surprise. They expected each other. I leaned closer to the monitor. The audio system did not cover that section of the property, but their body language said plenty. Randall pointed towards several rows. Brenda nodded. He showed her something on the clipboard. She nodded again. Then both of them walked deeper into the orchard. My workshop suddenly felt much smaller. The hum of the equipment filled the silence. Lily came in a few minutes later and immediately noticed the footage on the screen. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. We just watched. Eventually, Brenda and Randall stopped near one of the highest producing sections of the property. They remained there for nearly 15 minutes. Then they left through the same gate. The next morning, I reviewed every second of the recording. Something caught my eye. During their meeting, Randall unfolded a map. Not a neighborhood map. My property map. Irrigation lines. Access paths. Harvest zones. Detailed information. Information that was never publicly available. I printed the frame and stared at it for a long time. That map should not have existed outside my records. Someone had obtained it. The question was how. Later that afternoon, I visited the county records office. The building smelled faintly of paper and floor polish. Most of the information I requested was public. Property boundaries, easements, basic documents. Nothing unusual. But none of those records matched the map in Randall's hands. His version contained details only someone actively studying the orchard would know. That realization stayed with me all the way home. Then another surprise arrived. Tom Harrison called again. This time he sounded excited. A resident had anonymously shared copies of several HOA financial summaries. Tom thought I should see them. We met that evening on his porch. The air smelled like fresh rain. Crickets chirped from nearby hedges. Together we reviewed the documents. At first glance they looked ordinary. Budgets, vendor payments, event expenses. Then Tom pointed to several entries clustered across multiple months. Consulting reimbursements, agricultural assessments, property review services, different labels, same destination. Randall Pierce. The amounts were not enormous, but they appeared again and again. Small numbers attract less attention. That seemed intentional. Then I noticed something else. Several reimbursements had been approved directly by Brenda. The pattern that had been forming for months suddenly looked much clearer. Missing harvests, false complaints, rumors, surveillance, financial connections. None of it appeared isolated anymore. And for the first time, I started to think the orchard was only part of the story. Then Lily found something hidden inside the festival records. The file Lily found was buried 3 folders deep inside the festival budget archive. It looked ordinary at first. A spreadsheet, a vendor summary. Nothing that would catch attention during a routine review. Then she sorted the entries by date. The room went quiet. Several payments had been approved before the vendors were even selected. That should not have been possible. The glow from her laptop reflected across the kitchen table. Outside, wind rustled through the orchard. Lily clicked another tab. More entries appeared. The same names surfaced again. Randall's Consulting Company. Event reimbursements. Administrative reviews. Property assessments. Different labels. Same destination. The numbers were never large enough to trigger alarm. They were just large enough to accumulate. I pulled my chair closer. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from a mug that had long since gone cold. We spent the next 2 hours comparing records. Every time we followed a payment trail, it seemed to circle back toward the same small group of people. Brenda approved expenses. Randall received payments. New complaints appeared against residents. Then additional consulting fees followed. The pattern repeated again and again. That should have been enough. Yet one question still bothered me. Why spend so much effort targeting an orchard? The answer arrived unexpectedly 3 days later. I was repairing an irrigation valve near the eastern fence line when Mrs. Evelyn Carter stopped by. She was one of the oldest residents in Willow Creek Estates. She moved slowly. She noticed everything. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. Evelyn stood beside the gate and watched me work for a moment. Then she asked whether the rumors about HOA expansion were true. I looked up immediately. What expansion? She seemed surprised by the question. According to Evelyn, several residents had heard discussions about creating a larger community recreation zone near the edge of the neighborhood. Walking paths, garden spaces, event grounds, public attractions. Most people dismissed it as gossip. Yet the idea sounded strangely familiar. My orchard sat directly beside the area she described. After Evelyn left, I could not stop thinking about it. The pieces started moving again. Complaints against the orchard. Questions about agricultural activity. Pressure on customers. Property reviews. Repeated inspections. Suddenly those actions seemed connected to something bigger than stolen fruit. Later that evening, I searched through months of HOA meeting recordings posted online. Most were painfully boring. Budget updates. Landscaping discussions. Committee reports. Then I found a meeting from 8 months earlier. The video quality was poor. The audio crackled occasionally. But one comment stood out. A board member mentioned future community growth opportunities near the eastern boundary. Brenda quickly redirected the discussion before details could be explored. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet it changed everything. The next morning, I walked through the orchard before sunrise. Cool air settled across the rows. Dew sparkled beneath the first hints of daylight. I stopped near the eastern fence and looked across the property. For years I had seen trees, irrigation lines, harvest rows. Now I saw something different. Valuable land. Land that connected directly to neighborhood expansion plans. The realization settled heavily in my mind. Maybe the thefts were never the goal. Maybe they were simply part of a larger strategy. A strategy designed to weaken the orchard's reputation, reduce support, and create pressure over time. Then my phone buzzed with a new security alert. Brenda had just entered the property again. The alert arrived at 6:12 a.m. I was already awake. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen as I opened the security feed on my tablet. Brenda stood inside the eastern section of the orchard. Morning fog drifted between the rows. Dew covered the grass. She carried her familiar wicker basket. Nothing about her movements looked cautious anymore. She walked straight toward one of the most productive areas on the property. That confidence told me something important. She believed there would never be consequences. I watched for several minutes. She moved from tree to tree, selecting fruit with the ease of someone shopping in her own backyard. Then she stopped near one of the cameras. For a second, I thought she had noticed it. Instead, she adjusted her sunglasses and continued deeper into the orchard. The feed ended 20 minutes later when she left through the side gate. I saved the footage and headed outside. Cool air brushed against my face. The orchard looked peaceful. Birds chirped from the fence line. Nothing about the scene suggested months of theft, complaints, and rumors. Yet the evidence kept growing. By mid-morning, Lily joined me in the workshop. We reviewed the newest recordings together. The screen filled with timestamps, camera angles, and archive files. At this point, the collection looked less like a security archive and more like an investigation. Then Lily opened a folder she had been organizing for weeks. Inside were screenshots, payment records, meeting notes, complaint letters, and photographs. Hundreds of files. Every connection we had found sat in one place. Looking at it all together changed something. The pattern was no longer theoretical. It was visible, clear, structured. Brenda and Randall appeared throughout nearly every category. Then another name surfaced repeatedly. Susan McCall. She served as treasurer for the HOA. Her name appeared beside reimbursement approvals, consulting payments, and festival expenses. Until that moment, I had barely paid attention to her. Now I started noticing how often she appeared. That afternoon, Tom Harrison stopped by the workshop. The smell of fresh sawdust mixed with warm summer air as we spread documents across a large work table. Tom studied the records carefully. He had spent decades working with numbers. Small inconsistencies stood out to him. Within an hour, he identified several expense categories that made little sense. Certain charges appeared multiple times under different descriptions. Some vendor invoices lacked supporting documentation. Others seemed unusually vague. Nothing proved wrongdoing by itself. Together, however, they painted a troubling picture. Tom removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. This is bigger than neighborhood politics. Hearing him say it out loud carried weight. Tom was not dramatic. He avoided conflict whenever possible. If he believed something was wrong, it was worth taking seriously. Over the next several days, our circle quietly expanded. Evelyn Carter shared notes from previous HOA meetings. Another resident provided copies of archived newsletters. A local business owner described unusual conversations about future development plans near the eastern boundary of the neighborhood. Piece by piece, more information surfaced. Nobody wanted public confrontation. Not yet. Most simply wanted answers. The orchard had become a gathering point for those questions. People started stopping by more often. Some came to buy fruit. Others came to talk. Many carried concerns of their own. Complaints, rumors, unexpected HOA notices. Similar experiences kept appearing. Different details. Same themes. The feeling in the community was beginning to shift. Then Lily made a discovery that stopped everyone cold. Hidden inside a planning packet for the festival was a proposed concept drawing. The image showed walking paths, gathering areas, garden displays, and event spaces stretching across land that looked very familiar. My land. Then we noticed the date on the document. The date on the concept drawing was 8 months old. I stared at the corner of the page while the workshop fell silent. Even the cooling fan seemed quieter. 8 months. That meant the discussions had started long before the first complaint appeared in my mailbox. Long before customers began hearing rumors. Long before fruit started disappearing from the orchard. Lily slowly slid the document across the table. The paper smelled faintly of printer ink. A red circle highlighted the eastern section of the neighborhood. My property sat directly in the center of the proposed recreation zone. Walking paths crossed through orchard rows. Event spaces covered productive ground. Garden displays occupied areas where fruit trees currently stood. Somebody had spent significant time planning this. Tom adjusted his glasses and looked at me. Neither of us needed to say it. The orchard was not accidentally in the way. The orchard was the obstacle. Over the next week, our small group met several times. Nothing formal. Just neighbors gathering around work tables, kitchen counters, and porch swings. The smell of coffee became a constant companion. So did stacks of documents. Evelyn brought meeting notes. Tom reviewed expense records. Lily organized footage and timelines. Each person contributed something different. Together, the picture became clearer. The complaints had not appeared randomly. They followed a sequence. First came concerns about traffic, then appearance issues, then questions about agricultural activity, then rumors about compliance problems. Each step chipped away at public support. The strategy was patient, gradual, designed to avoid attention. Then another discovery changed everything. Lily found archived promotional material for the upcoming festival. One section described future community opportunities. Most people would have skipped over it. She did not. Buried in the language was a reference to expanded public gathering space near the eastern boundary. The wording sounded harmless. Yet the location matched the concept drawing perfectly. The plan was already being introduced to residents. Slowly, quietly, one idea at a time. That evening, I walked through the orchard alone. The air smelled sweet from ripening fruit. Leaves rustled overhead. Sunset painted long shadows across the rows. I stopped near the eastern fence and looked toward the neighborhood. For years, this place represented stability, family, routine, hard work. Now I saw something else. Leverage. The land held value far beyond fruit production. That explained why pressure kept increasing. The realization sharpened my focus. Complaining about Brenda would not solve this. Arguing with Randall would not solve it either. Evidence would. Proof would. Facts. Wood. The next phase required patience. Fortunately, patience was something orchards teach very well. A few days later, I started making preparations. New storage drives arrived for the camera system. Additional backups were created. Every recording was duplicated and organized. Every document was scanned. Every photograph was cataloged. Lily built a searchable archive. Tom cross-referenced dates. We treated every detail like it mattered. Because it did. Meanwhile, the festival moved closer. Banners appeared throughout the neighborhood. Social media promotions increased. Brenda seemed everywhere, smiling in photographs, leading planning sessions, talking about community spirit. The contrast was almost surreal. The more evidence we uncovered, the more confident she appeared in public. Then an opportunity presented itself. During one planning meeting, Brenda announced that local produce would be featured prominently at the festival. Residents applauded. Vendors celebrated. Brenda looked pleased with herself. I looked at Lily. Lily looked back at me. Neither of us spoke. We were thinking the same thing. If Brenda truly believed the orchard belonged to her personal supply chain, she would probably keep taking from it. And if she kept taking from it, cameras would keep recording. The plan forming in my mind was simple, quiet, legal, and extremely patient. Then I started preparing a new section of the orchard. The new section sat near the southern edge of the orchard where morning sunlight lingered longest. From a distance, it looked completely ordinary. Healthy plants, bright color, clean rows, nothing unusual. That was exactly the point. The weeks leading up to the festival passed slowly. Warm afternoons settled over Willow Creek estates. The smell of cut grass drifted through open windows. Banners appeared at every entrance. Volunteers moved tables and equipment across the community center lawn. Everywhere I looked, people talked about the festival. Brenda seemed thrilled by the attention. Her social media posts multiplied. Photos, announcements, smiling group pictures, community spirit, neighborhood pride. The performance never stopped. Meanwhile, the cameras kept recording. 3 days before the event, another motion alert appeared before sunrise. I opened the feed from my workshop. The sky was still dark blue. A light mist hung above the orchard. Brenda entered through the side gate carrying the familiar wicker basket. She moved confidently between the rows. No hesitation. No concern. She had done this too many times. I watched her stop beside the new section. She examined the plants carefully. Then she began filling the basket. One handful, then another, then another. The camera captured everything. The timestamp glowed clearly in the corner of the screen. I leaned back in my chair and saved the footage. Lily stood beside me watching. Neither of us said much. There was nothing left to say. The evidence spoke for itself. Later that same morning, another camera captured something even more useful. Brenda loaded the basket into her Lexus. Then she drove directly to the community center. Randall met her near a storage tent. Together they carried several containers inside. The entire sequence appeared on video. Every step, every movement, every timestamp. The festival arrived 2 days later beneath clear skies and warm temperatures. Families filled the grounds early. Music drifted across the lawn. Children ran between activity booths. The smell of grilled food mixed with fresh lemonade and flowers from decorative displays. I stayed near the edge of the crowd. Tom stood nearby. Evelyn arrived shortly after. Lily helped monitor several live camera feeds from a tablet. Everyone knew the plan. Nobody needed instructions. We simply waited. Around noon, Brenda unveiled one of the produce displays near the center of the event. Residents gathered around. She proudly described locally grown ingredients and community partnerships. Cameras flashed. People applauded. The performance continued. Then she picked up one of the peppers from the basket. The same basket. The same produce collected from my orchard days earlier. She smiled for photographs. Several residents sampled items from the display table. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then expressions started changing. People reached for water. Conversations stopped. Confused laughter spread through the crowd. A few moments later, the drink station became unexpectedly popular. Nobody was in danger. Nobody was harmed. But the surprise was immediate and unforgettable. Brenda looked completely caught off guard. The festival atmosphere shifted in seconds. Questions started flying from every direction. Where did the produce come from? Who supplied it? Why had nobody labeled it properly? The attention she normally controlled suddenly moved beyond her control. That was when Tom quietly handed several residents printed screenshots from the security footage. Clear images. Clear timestamps. Clear evidence. The first reactions were disbelief, then curiosity, then silence. One by one, people started connecting the dots. The basket, the orchard, the repeated visits, the photographs, the timing. Brenda's confidence began fading in real time. Across the lawn, I noticed Randall looking increasingly uncomfortable. He knew exactly what those screenshots meant, but the videos were only the beginning. Then Lily opened the archive folder. The archive folder opened on Lily's tablet with dozens of neatly organized files. The noise from the festival continued around us, but it sounded different now. Conversations were quieter. People were paying attention. The smell of grilled food still drifted through the air, yet most eyes were no longer focused on the event booths. They were focused on the evidence. Lily tapped the first video. The screen showed a clear timestamp. Brenda entering the orchard. The next clip showed another visit. Then another. Different days. Different weather. Same pattern. The footage rolled steadily forward. No dramatic narration. No accusations. Just recorded facts. Residents gathered around the tablet one by one. Several recognized locations immediately. Others recognized dates connected to community events. The silence grew heavier with each clip. Then Tom distributed copies of the financial summaries. The papers moved through the crowd like a slow wave. People compared reimbursement records to vendor lists. Questions started appearing almost immediately. Why were consulting payments repeated so often? Why did the same names appear across multiple expense categories? Why had nobody explained those charges before? Across the lawn, Brenda attempted to regain control of the situation. She moved between small groups, speaking quickly and gesturing toward the festival displays. But something had changed. People were listening less. For months, her confidence had carried authority. Now that confidence looked different. It looked defensive. Randall remained near the storage tents. He checked his phone repeatedly. He spoke with several board members. None of those conversations seemed productive. The evidence had already escaped their control. Meanwhile, additional residents began sharing experiences of their own. One family described receiving unusual violation notices shortly before selling their property. Another resident remembered being pressured over landscaping issues that suddenly disappeared after a committee change. Small stories surfaced from every direction. Individually, they seemed minor. Together, they formed a pattern. The afternoon sun dipped lower over the community center lawn. Long shadows stretched across the grass. The festival that was supposed to celebrate neighborhood unity had become something else entirely. It had become a public review of months of unanswered questions. Then Evelyn Carter stepped forward. She carried a folder thicker than anyone expected. Over the years, she had saved meeting notes, newsletters, and community correspondence. Most people considered them old paperwork. Today, they became valuable. Evelyn calmly showed several residents' references to development discussions dating back months. Growth opportunities, future community assets, expanded public spaces. The language was vague, but the direction was obvious. Several residents compared those references to the concept drawing Lily had found. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the orchard was no longer viewed as a source of complaints. It was viewed as a target. That realization spread quickly. By early evening, several HOA board members announced an emergency review of financial records and development proposals. The announcement triggered another wave of discussion. Some residents looked frustrated. Others looked relieved. Many simply wanted transparency. For the first time in months, people were asking the right questions. The pressure that had been aimed at the orchard began shifting toward those responsible for creating it. I stood near the edge of the crowd and watched the change unfold. The breeze carried the scent of fruit trees from beyond the neighborhood. Nearby, Lily closed the tablet and smiled slightly. We had not argued. We had not chased anyone. We had simply documented what happened and waited for the facts to speak. And now they finally were. Then one board member revealed what would happen at the next meeting. The next meeting took place 6 days later. Every seat inside the community center filled before it even started. Folding chairs lined the walls. Residents stood near the back. The smell of coffee drifted through the room. Quiet conversations echoed beneath the fluorescent lights. Nobody was there for landscaping updates. Nobody was there for committee reports. People wanted answers. The board opened the meeting with a formal announcement. An independent review of financial records had begun. Several reimbursement categories were being examined. Development discussions would be suspended pending further review. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then questions started. Lots of them. This time nobody redirected the conversation. Nobody changed the subject. The records spoke for themselves. Over the following weeks, more information surfaced. Additional invoices were reviewed. Archived communications were examined. Several residents who had stayed quiet for months came forward with their own documentation. The pattern became impossible to ignore. What began as scattered concerns eventually formed a complete picture. The pressure campaign against the orchard lost credibility almost overnight. Complaints stopped arriving. Rumors disappeared. The proposed recreation expansion quietly vanished from discussion. As for Brenda, her influence faded quickly. She resigned from multiple committee positions before the review process concluded. Randall's consulting arrangement ended soon afterward. Neither of them controlled the conversation anymore. The facts did. By the time autumn arrived, the atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates felt different. Calmer, more honest. Board meetings became better attended. Financial reports became easier to access. Residents asked more questions. Transparency stopped being a slogan and became an expectation. One Saturday morning, I walked through the orchard with Lily as golden leaves drifted across the rows. The air smelled crisp and clean. Harvest season was in full swing. Families filled the property again. Children carried baskets between the trees. Customers returned. Some had never really left. They had simply been waiting for the noise to settle. Tom Harrison stopped by that afternoon with a grin on his face and a box of fresh donuts. Evelyn arrived later carrying homemade pie. Other neighbors followed. What started as a difficult season ended with something unexpected. The orchard became more than a business. It became a gathering place. A reminder that communities work best when people pay attention. A few months later, Lily suggested creating a small community harvest program. The idea spread quickly. Local families volunteered. Schools participated. Residents donated supplies. The project grew faster than anyone expected. The same land that some people once viewed as an obstacle became one of the neighborhood's most valued assets. Sometimes visitors still ask how everything changed. I usually smile and look across the trees before answering. The truth is simple. We did not win because we were louder. We did not win because we were more powerful. We won because we documented the truth and refused to let it disappear. The orchard is still here. The trees are still producing. The gates still open every morning. And every time I pass the southern section where those peppers once grew, I remember how a small act of patience exposed something much larger. Justice was never hiding in the chaos. It was growing quietly the whole time.